There is a crisis in the way we have traditionally been measuring demand for TV product and performance. The crisis is based really on a methodology, and that's panel-based systems. We are seeing, and we are all feeling in our businesses, and maybe for years, something isn't always working just correct, but we have blind faith, and that blind faith is beginning to erode. And for some of us here in New York or Britain, when you leave the TV realm and you see all of these brilliant panel-based systems getting the most important questions of life, like who's going to lead you and where your country is going to be allied and involved with, when you see them getting it wrong, these panel-based systems are called into question. And doesn't seem to be an answer or a solution, because like any process or system in manufacturing, in evolution, ultimately the world gets more complicated, new technologies come and kind of usurp the old ones. And so for that reason, when we talk about panel-based systems, at least to me, and I'm speaking for myself right now, maybe you can't build a better mousetrap. And maybe the steam engine isn't around for good reason. And maybe none of us want to go back to analog distribution. So what replaces it? Well, it's the power of big data. And when you say power of big data, and for me a couple of years ago, someone said that to me, and I would remember, I am just hoping this business doesn't change so much in the next few years that I don't have to learn anything about that I could just ride it out. But we can't anymore, because the power is overwhelming. We're at the infancy of an incredible revolution that will soon swamp everything behind it. It's good and great that we learn about this better and now. And actually, it's not as complicated as it sounds. It's much more simple. So long story short, I resolved, once I saw so many things changing and the tides changing, to get out of the old world and really learn everything I can in the new world of what digital is doing to transform everything. And I've been fortunate to be able to invest and get involved in some companies, but the first guys I met with are really singularly impressive. So I'm going to introduce in a minute Warren Seger, who's CEO of Parrot Analytics. Warren has developed a global TV measurement system that is fascinating and brilliant in its simplicity, its ease of use. So I'm going to introduce him in a second. Before I do that, I also want to give a shout out to one of our fellow board members at Parrot Analytics, David Bishop. You may know David. He was president of Sony Home Entertainment, president of MGM Home Entertainment. I go way back with David. I've learned a lot from David, and I appreciate really being a board member with him. So I think I've covered the main points. I'm going to come back in a few minutes and join for conversation, but Warren Seger is going to give us now a whole understanding of this new environment, digital measurement, and what he does within it. So thank you very much, and I'll bring Warren up to the stage. Give him that.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Can everyone hear me? Maybe just raise your hand down the back if you can hear me okay. Cool. Fantastic. Good morning. Thank you very much. I know you've had a board meeting at 8:30 in the morning, and it's about 11 o'clock, and there's a gala tonight, so the last thing anyone wants to do is just have death by PowerPoint, so we'll try to make it short and quick and do some interactive session at the end. That was quite important because usually I kind of come up and then we present about Parrot Analytics, and even though a lot of you guys in the audience are some of our clients, you know who we are. The ones who aren't are like, who is this kid up there talking about the future of the industry? What does he know about the future in the industry? So that was important. It's ex-president of AMC and MGM and Sony Pictures saying that, okay, this is actually the future of the industry. So that's that. So my name is Warren Seger. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Parrot Analytics. And what I really want to talk to you about today, first, thank you so much for your time, and it's an honor to be here, is basically what Bruce just gave the little intro about, is the future of the industry from a measurement standpoint, because there's a lot of talk and buzzwords out there about big data and data science, and that's revolutionizing all the industries, pretty much every single industry out there. But what does it have to do with television? How can we bring it to television in a way that's easy and actionable for us? So before I do that, do some really quick trends. Hopefully the screen setup works. So this is what we saw about 4 years ago when we first started developing the platform technology, were 3 trends in the industry that were rapidly developing. And this was all driven by broadband penetration around the world. One, there was a really rapid proliferation of content distribution platforms, right? The barrier to entry to launch an OTT platform was going to increasingly become lower. And that was going to proliferate a lot of them really rapidly around the world. Many ISPs are now launching their own OTT platforms. And what we saw that was going to lead to was this unprecedented fragmentation of audiences across those platforms, right? Whereas previously, everyone watched the same thing on the same screen at the same time of the day, now everyone's watching something else, something different on a different device, on a different platform, all around the world. And what that in turn was going to lead to, and here's the critical problem, is the industry's ability to measure these audiences across those platforms to be less and less effective with every passing year, seemingly every passing month. Because a lot of those platforms, as we know, don't share their data. Many of them won't, most of them won't, and as they proliferate, as audiences fragment across those platforms, the more difficult it is to measure these audiences and what they're watching. So this kind of leads to a problem where basically the whole panel-based, survey-based approach that we've taken to measure audiences over the past 3 or 4 decades is becoming increasingly ineffective in today's fragmented world. And I guess, to boil down the problem to a really simple question is like, how popular is a TV show in a certain market? And that question sometimes is almost impossible. If the show airs on a certain platform in a certain market that we don't have the data for, it's pretty much impossible to answer. So unless we try to panel them, do some surveys, or trying to estimate or gauge how popular it is. So what we set out to do, we said, okay, look, what we want to do is we want to introduce a global measurement system. And a system that basically enables you to capture the popularity of any TV show anywhere in the world, regardless of what platform that TV show airs on. And the TV industry has never had a global measurement system before. If you're in the US, you're familiar with Nielsen. If you're in the UK, you're familiar with Barb. If you're in Australia, you're familiar with OSTEM. There's all these different measurement systems that actually can be compared because they have different methodologies, different panel sizes, and different measurement standards, market to market. So we wanted to build a global measurement system that had never existed before in the industry, and it needed to satisfy 3 criteria that no other measurement system had ever satisfied before. One, it needed to measure the demand for content in real time, because demand's always changing. House of Cards could be popular in Japan today, but might not be popular tomorrow. It needs to be cross-platform, meaning it needed to measure the demand for content regardless of what platform it airs on. Doesn't matter if it airs on HBO, Amazon, Hulu, Netflix. And it needed to be country-specific. And this is a critical part, because some TV shows, as we'll see in a second, are really popular in some markets, but not that popular in others. And so, and we all know this, you guys know this a lot better than anyone out there, the cultural nuances to the demand for content. And it's really important here that you notice we use the word demand, and this is something that we've introduced because it's the basic principle, without getting too philosophical about it, the basic principle of what is popular, what is popular, how do you define popularity for TV content in itself is changing very, very, very rapidly, too rapidly for the industry to keep up with. And so, as you'll see, what we've said, this is the only future-proof approach to measuring the popularity of content. And we're going to call it demand for content, because the demand, if there is high demand for a show in a market, that will translate to success. And success in itself is different depending on who you are. If you're a linear network, success for you is high ratings and ad revenue. If you're an SVOD platform, success for you is attracting customers, customer growth, keeping customers, customer retention. But it's all driven by the demand for content. And that's what we wanted to solve for, create a global measurement system to measure demand for content. So how do you go about doing that? Well, we said, how do people express their demand for content today? So if I'm a fan of, pick a new show like Westworld, and I'm living in Tokyo, in Japan, how am I going to express my demand for the TV show? Now, the largest medium where people are interacting with TV content now is the internet. It's about 3.8 billion people connected to the internet. Very quickly, it's going to be pretty much the entire planet. And these people are expressing their demand for content in different ways. So if I'm a fan of the TV show Westworld and I'm in Tokyo in Japan, then I will express my demand for it in different ways. Even before it comes out, I might watch a trailer on YouTube or Vimeo or Dailymotion that might pique my interest. So I might see, oh, I wonder if it has like an IMDb rating or Rotten Tomatoes or one of the rating sites on it. Pretty good rating. This is what I do. So I go, let me read about the background of the show. So I might go on Wikipedia and do some research on it. I might read about it. I'm expressing my demand for the show. So certainly, if that piques my interest, I'll go on the Facebooks or the Instagrams, on social media to ask my family and friends about it, talk to my family and friends about it. I might go on Tumblr and read some blogs about it and see what other people are saying. It might come out, maybe in the US, maybe not even in my home market. What I'll do is I might go and actually torrent it. I might go on Popcorn Times and download it or stream it illegally off a file locker or a file sharing site. So you have these billions of people that are expressing their demand for content in different ways. They're watching it, they're streaming it, they're sharing it, they're critiquing it, they're rating it, they're discussing it, they're talking about it, they're watching and engaging with it. So we call that demand for content. And so we thought, well, one, let's go capture all those sources. And that is an immense, it's harder than it looks, and I'll show you in a second. And two, how do you combine all these things together? Because surely, like if again, sticking with that example, if I'm a fan of Westworld and I'm in Japan, and I go on its Facebook page and I press like, surely I'm not telling you as much about my demand for the show as if I watch 3 back-to-back episodes, right, of some streaming site on the internet. The latter just took 3 hours of my time. It's a stronger indication of demand. So all we had to do is develop this weighting system, a system that allows us to combine all those signals together according to how much demand they represent. So basically, watching an episode is a stronger indication of demand than writing a comment on a social platform. And this weighting system is absolutely critical. It's the most critical piece of the entire operation here because it allows us to filter out the noise. Right? You have some shows that have really high buzz, really high noise, but actually don't perform very well. And it's through this weighting system that we filter out all of that. So, conscious of time, but I wanted to explain the background here as to what it is that we do for those in the audience who aren't as familiar with it. So, we process over 1 billion data points a day. I'm going to pause for about 3 seconds while we process that. We capture and process and weight over 1 billion data points a day from every single country on the planet, and there are 249 ISO-listed countries in the world. We capture content popularity in every single country on the planet. We process over 1 billion data points a day. This is not extrapolation. These are not surveys. These are not panels. Those interactions actually happen every single day. Someone and somewhere is interacting with a TV show, and we're capturing that, and we're weighting it. And we're combining all of it into a global measurement system. A global measurement system that has 2 components. It's the only thing you need to remember right here from all of that start. 2 components. One, a demand rating. Basically, that allows you to look at a show, in this case, The Crown, and say, gee, what markets have the highest demand for The Crown on a given day? And how do each of these markets move and change over time? And demand expressions allows us to zoom in on a market, say France, on a given day, and see exactly how much more popular Westworld is on that day in France than Orange is the New Black. Again, the system doesn't care what platforms these shows air on. They don't care whether they even air in the market or not. The system allows you to see the demand for these titles on a country-specific basis. So with that, basically what I wanted to show here is some examples of how do you put that measurement system to use and what can it tell us. So we'll start off easy. We can slice and dice the data in any way, shape, or form. We have access to literally the largest audience behavior data sets in the world. So we'll start off with what shows had the highest peak demand in 2016 in some markets around the world. So starting in the US, Game of Thrones reached the highest point of demand that any show reached this year in the US, followed by The Walking Dead, and Marvel's Luke Cage actually got off to a really good start in the US. In China, Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead also are number 1 and 2. And I want to stress here, these are English language programs for now, and I will get to local content in a second. So these are the highest English language programs in some of the markets around the world. House of Cards is quite popular in China. Now I think we know why. And BBC's Sherlock also. In Brazil, Mr. Robot and Stranger Things get into the top 5 as well. In France, Orange is the New Black is really popular. It's in fact only second to Game of Thrones in terms of its demand. Quantico comes into the top 5. And in New Zealand, Westworld actually got off to a really, really good start. So that's really easy. Let's get to how do top shows change over time. So here we're going to another market. Here we're going to all the other side of the world, to Australia. And we're seeing what the Aussies here want from June to October, right? So the top 5 shows across 5 months and how these top shows change over time. So we can see that, and I'll use this screen here for those couple of rows. So Game of Thrones and June and July, that's when the season ended, and it started gradually dropping down from number 1 in the market to number 2, number 3, or number 5 in September, then it disappeared. Stranger Things, July, it actually peaked in August. It dropped in September, then it disappeared from the top 5 in Australia. Pretty Little Liars is the only show that consistently stays in the top 5 for those 5 months. And The Walking Dead and Westworld both entered as number 1 and 2 in October. So here we're seeing how the top shows change over time in a given market, right? Any market around the world. In Latin America, what we noticed in 2016 was dark and mysterious titles have high demand. So what we're doing here is we're saying, if we take Game of Thrones to have 100% of demand, what are these other titles? What percentage demand do they have relative to it? So we can see that this is average demand in 2016. Across the entire year, The Walking Dead had about 20% less demand as number 2 behind Game of Thrones. And Pretty Little Liars about 24%, and then Stranger Things and American Horror Story about half of the demand that Game of Thrones had in the market. Again, these are examples of how do you slice and dice the data, some sort of comparisons you can make, and they will get a bit deeper. So here what we're doing is we're looking at platforms in certain markets. So now we're going back to Canada, a country whose population is about to see a sharp boost. What we're seeing here is we're comparing original series on Netflix, Hulu, Yahoo, and Amazon in Canada, so the demand for their original series. So Stranger Things was by far the most in-demand show across digital platforms in Canada, followed by Orange is the New Black and Marvel's Luke Cage, about the same level. Really interesting here is Hulu has 2 shows, original series, in the top 20 in Canada, and Amazon Video only has 1, and Community is there as Yahoo's 1 title there as well. So you're getting, and this will get even more interesting here, because you're looking at a platform like Amazon Video with a lot of content budgets and productions, and again, these are country-specific nuances to the demand for content. And so what could be really popular in one market might not be very popular, even in an adjacent market. We're going to China now. So the other side. Again, we're comparing these digital platforms. So the reason why we picked Canada, and then where those platforms are available in the US, in China, none of those platforms are available. Again, as expected, Netflix's original series have the highest demand in China out of the other OTT platforms there. None of them are available, so this is where the measurement system comes to life, measuring demand even for content that's not available yet in the market. What's really interesting here is Crackle, which presumably has a lot less budget than platforms like Hulu and Amazon, actually has more demand for its original series in China than the other platforms, and it's primarily led by startup and comedians in cars getting coffee, which are really popular in China. So again, slice and dice the demand that we capture. For example, we can aggregate the demand for content at a studio level. So we can see that in 2016, Warner Brothers TV and Fox TV did really well in Argentina, followed closely by ABC and HBO in terms of the market share of demand for these studios and on a market-by-market basis. So now you have a global measurement system where you can benchmark yourself, your content against your competitors as well, as at a portfolio level on a market-by-market basis. So I think it's fitting that we look at Shonda Rhimes titles here, given the theme. And so we're looking at Shondaland titles and the demand for them globally. And here's something really interesting. There is moderate demand for Shonda Rhimes titles in North America, but actually Latin America, Southern Europe, Africa, really high demand for her titles, right? And then we can actually understand specifically in which markets, which title has the highest demand. So in most of the markets around the world, Grey's Anatomy is #1 out of the Shondaland titles, 88% of the markets. Scandal, 10% of the markets, mostly the African markets. And How to Get Away with Murder, Southeast Asian markets. It's #1 out of the portfolio in those markets. So I mentioned there's different ways that people are interacting with content now, right? So what we want to do now is look at, can we break down the different ways that people are interacting with content? So what we're doing here is we're looking at Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead, and Marvel's Luke Cage in the UK on a given day, October 24th this year. So these shows are different parts of their life cycle, they're different parts of their seasons, and what we're gonna look at is how people are engaging and interacting with them. So Game of Thrones finished the season, and the off-season, relatively equal breakdown. So we're comparing file sharing, primarily legitimate streaming, social media, and all the other types of engagements. We bucket them as other. So Game of Thrones is relatively equal. The Walking Dead, over 70% of the interactions that we captured for The Walking Dead on that day happened on social media. Now, this happened to be right before its new season premiere. People are excited about it. They're talking about it. There's high anticipation for it. So they're going to social media and talking about it. Marvel's Luke Cage, on the other hand, had already had its full season release, all the episodes. And what we see for original series that have all of their episodes released at once is shortly after their release, no one is discussing it on social media because everyone is at different points in the season. Like I'm not going to go on Facebook and check out what my friends are talking about Marvel's Luke Cage if I'm watching it because I don't want them to kill it for me. I'm maybe episode 3, and I know someone out there has already watched the whole season and is going to kill it for me. So less than 1% of all the interactions that we captured in the UK on that day for Marvel's Luke Cage came from social media, less than 1%, whereas over 70% came from social media on The Walking Dead. And I use this as an illustration as to why it's really critical that we do what we do and that we capture all the different ways that people interact with content and we weight and combine it because there are like social media listening tools out there that many of you undoubtedly use. And if you use the social media listening tools, it will show that Marvel's Luke Cage actually wasn't that popular at all because no one's talking about it on social media. But it is actually popular in the UK. There is high demand for it. It's just that no one is talking about it on social media. It's an illustration of how people engage with different types of content in different ways. So we look at now let's aggregate at a region. Like what I want to understand is, I want to compare how different regions or continents and what different types of content they're really into. So we averaged out demand over 2016 across North America, Latin America, Asia, and Europe. And what we want to see is what genres over-index in which regions and what genres under-index. Again, this is 2016 only. So North America, animation, Latin America as well, children, drama, horror, really over-indexed 2016. Europe, drama and horror indexed quite strongly. In Asia, variety and reality TV shows were really picking up in 2016. Not only can we know which genres are picking up in which regions, so this is from like a strategic content investment, production, licensing point of view at an aggregate level, but also we can actually quantify exactly how much more demand there is for horror and drama titles in Europe in 2016 relative to the other regions. Exactly how much South Americans like animation and horror and how much that genre is picking up in the market. So we can quantify specifically not only how a given TV show is doing in a market, but how an entire genre or micro-genre of content is doing in a certain region, how that's changing over time. We can zoom in. Here's an illustration. So we're going to Denmark in this case. And what I want to do is across 2016, break out the demand for all the TV shows by genre and then by micro-genre. So drama was by the breakout genre in Denmark. And then within drama, it's crime drama, it's fantasy drama, it's procedural drama that has high demand in Denmark in 2016. It's not teen drama, right? So we're getting beyond the point as to, oh, well, okay, drama is really popular. Well, that can entail so many things. We actually can go down to like a micro-genre level specificity of what's actually popular where. And then, as you saw earlier, we can go within procedural drama and see exactly which procedural drama is really popular in Denmark and which one is picking up pace. we can look at demographics because we can capture who's actually expressing the demand for content. We can actually see, okay, in Japan, people who express demand for comedy tend to be between 30 to 40, roughly equally split between male and female, whereas people who express demand for drama tend to skew older. So we can actually see the exact distribution of the demographics by title and by genre, by market. So these are examples of how we apply big data in an actionable way. So really quickly, I want to look at how does demand evolve over time. And here's an interesting phenomenon that I think a lot of people find really interesting. So we're looking at two, I'm going to call them episodic releases. These are two TV shows, Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead, that release one episode a week. And when we look at how the demand curve for them changes, this is in the US, we can see that there are spikes, weekly spikes, that align with the weekly releases of the episodes, to be expected. So here's a question. How does the demand curve look like for a Netflix original series or an Amazon original series that has all of its episodes dropped at once? Surely we're not going to see the weekly spike. Well, we can plot it. So here we're taking 3 new titles on Netflix, Fuller House, Jessica Jones, and Stranger Things, compared to 3 returning titles, Orange is the New Black, House of Cards, and Daredevil. And what we're looking at, this chart basically has day 0 is the day of release, and then 4 weeks after release. And we're overlaying the 4 weeks after release for each one of those shows all on the same chart. And what we can see is an interesting phenomenon. And this is true for every single Netflix original series with the exception of one. What we see is a large spike on the day of release of the show, a gradual drop during that first week, a second week rise, and we call it like a second weekend binge, is when people finish binging on the TV show, and then a really rapid decline, and it plateaus. With the exception of Stranger Things, which actually continued to pick up demand 3 and 4 weeks into its release. So this is really interesting. Now it comes, put yourself from a programming point of view, if you are following this business model, this programming model. What that basically means is, whereas previously you had 10 weeks where you knew the people were tuning in, if you're relying on one original series, one show, you know you have a 4-week window before the demand for basically flatlines. You need to replace it with something else. So 2 implications. One, the timing of your original series release, if you are using this model. When do you time your original series releases so you can maintain high demand throughout the year? And 2, the number of releases, because that's 4 weeks from peak demand to flatlining, near 0. And so now this gives you an insight as to why some of those platforms are increasingly investing billions and tens, soon hundreds of original series, is because on a market-by-market basis, you need to sustain those releases to sustain a high average. So by having a cross-platform global measurement system, we can now understand what's actually happening in the industry, regardless of what platform we're looking at. What affects demand? Surely a lot of you will be thinking, and we'll do some Q&A soon, but what affects demand? Like marketing, surely, yeah, absolutely, it impacts demand. It's our job to measure that. But again, we thought it's fitting that we look at the impact of winning an Emmy Award on the demand for content. The hypothesis being that surely winning an Emmy Award should lead to an increased popularity of the show, and it actually does. It leads to an increase in the demand of the show. All the TV shows that pick up an Emmy Award see a spike in demand. What we notice, though, is that that spike is inversely proportional to the existing popularity of the content. That is, the more popular a show is already, the less percentage increase it achieves when it wins an Emmy Award. And that kind of makes sense. Like you don't really expect Game of Thrones to triple in its popularity after winning an Emmy Award. Everyone already watches it. To illustrate, Baskets had a 700% overnight increase in demand after I picked up an Emmy Award. And it doubled its long-term demand afterwards. So it wasn't just a spike and it flatlined. It had a spike, and it doubled its long-term demand. So it basically doubled its popularity after winning an Emmy Award relative to before, mainly because a lot of people are like, what is this thing? Let's have a look at it. It lost most of those people, but it doubled its existing fan base. So again, what affects demand? What we're looking at here is the demand for Pokemon, the TV show. That line that you see on the chart marks the release of Pokemon Go, the app, the game, in July, in early July. And what you're seeing here is the rise of the demand for the TV show through a release of an unrelated collateral, like it wasn't. And what this talks to is the cross-media type of the industry, where TV shows now are no longer just TV shows. And that's the reason we call it a demand measurement system. Not views, not popularity, a demand, because TV shows are now franchises. They're games, they're books, they're music, they're movies sometimes. We released it in a blog post around July, and towards the end of July, Netflix actually had an article at CNBC that said this is exactly what they saw on the Netflix platform, views in terms of views for Pokemon the TV show. So now I've been talking about English titles mostly, but the same platform, the same system is language agnostic. It's content agnostic, it's platform agnostic. So we're looking at Attack on Titan. It's a Japanese title. And we actually see that it travels well. Not only is it popular in Japan, and so where the brighter spots, if you can see that on your screen, the brighter spots indicate where there's high demand. So not only is it popular in Japan, but also it travels well to China, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the US. Similarly, La Quesia Vecina, and I probably butchered the Spanish name for it, but not only is it popular in Spain, but in Bulgaria and Latin America. It starts to travel well. New Zealand. And so we're seeing local titles that actually are starting to travel just as well as these traditionally Hollywood or English type titles as well. So what I want to wrap up with very quickly is around the world, and this is again to kind of hammer home the point that we can now with a measurement system just see what's happening around the world. And we'll give a live demo of the actual product as well. So in 2016, Wrecked had twice as much demand as Casual. In Russia, The Expanse had 50% more popularity than Colony. In Germany, House of Cards, 30% more demand than Orange is the New Black. In Thailand, Silicon Valley, 2.5 times the demand as Startup. Startup is picking up pace really rapidly in Southeast Asia. South Korea, Shannara Chronicles and The Magicians, relatively even in 2016. In Italy, The Amazing Race, 40% more demand than Survivor. In India, Teen Wolf, 40% more demand than Supernatural. In Poland, The Loud House is really popular. So we're looking at animation titles, kids titles now. In Chile, Breaking Bad still has almost twice as much demand as Narcos, and it consistently stays that way. In South Africa, The Americans, 2.6 times the demand as A Halt and Catch Fire. So there's lots of different applications and uses, and we work with studios and broadcasters and networks, cable networks, OTT platforms to help with content acquisition, investment, and so on. What we wanted to do, though, is, as Bruce illustrated earlier, is not make this so hard to use, is not make it only accessible or understandable if you're a scientist or some big data junkie. So what we wanted to do was build a global demand portal. Basically a portal where you go in and see any of those things happening for yourself on a nice-to-use dashboard. And that's exactly what we've done. So 4 years and many millions of R&D later, we built a global demand portal where basically you can drop down from a menu to select a country and see how any given TV show is doing in that country relative to any other TV show over time. You can see the demographics for any given show in any market and how those demographics change and evolve over time. You can see the mood of the audiences towards a particular title and how that mood of the audiences is changing over time as well, because we capture all of that data from around the world. We can see the engagement of the fans towards a particular storyline, a particular episode in a TV show, and how that changes over time. Again, country by country, TV show by TV show. We can look at the demand breakdown. So I showed earlier there's different ways that people engage with the content. Some shows are really popular on social media, others aren't, but have huge demand on other platforms. So we provide the breakdown of that as well. There's lots of different ways that we can apply the system. So I'm going to invite Bruce back up here. We'll do a little bit of Q&A and hopefully capture as many of the questions as possible. If not, I'm going to be around, and you can always contact us as well. Thank you very much.
Give it up to Warren. Warren Seger. Okay. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and I'm going to open this up for a couple more questions. That's okay with everyone? The first thing, Ward, I'd like to ask, and a lot of folks in this room probably, this is fascinating and vast and amazing, and then you want to go back to your companies and describe this to your colleagues or your bosses, how this works. So tell me if I have it right. Around the world, you have the traditional panel-based systems, which range, I don't know, maybe 30, 40,000 homes in the US, some of which until this year we're still marking it in paper. So there are these big companies, and you're believing, or they're communicating with these people, and these people are telling them what they're watching. It only measures maybe what they're watching that night. And then they create all this math to extrapolate and say, this is what 315 Americans are doing.
315 million Americans.
315 million. So they're basing it off of a facsimile, really, of people. You don't know who these people are. You have no contact with them. Now, what you're saying is, on the other hand, you go into the world, and every day there's 1.25 billion interactions through the internet in relation to TV shows, and you're capturing all of that. And of course, and I'll get into this in a minute, weighing it. So that's 1.25 billion versus maybe there's 5,000 people paneled in an average country in Europe. All right, so, and you're looking at real people rather than extrapolations. These are real people interacting.
Correct.
So, all right, so then the question I have, because a lot of people are out there with these products and say, oh yeah, I could tell you that there's a billion or trillion, whatever, people on Twitter, including Donald Trump, and so we're just watching Twitter, but that can't be the whole world. So there was an interesting slide you put up. So tell me more about, you're not just weighing social media, you're looking at piracy, you're looking at people who create their passion YouTube video about Game of Thrones or so. What exactly are you combing out there in the world of the internet, and how are you weighing the importance of one thing over another and coming up with this demand rating?
Yeah, it's a really good question. All right, it's a great question. Look, increasingly, what we're seeing is, I don't have my phone on me, but I can watch something like on the bus, on the train to work. It could be a 20-minute clip of John Oliver's show or something, right? And I'll use the time and I'll watch it there. So one, the way people engage and watch content is becoming different. And two, me watching a TV show could be very different to you watching a TV show, right? So if I watch, last week tonight on John Oliver's episode and you watch it, you could then go to sleep afterwards. But if I watch it and I love it, and then I go tell everyone that I know to watch it, and you know how every office has that person that always tells everyone what the latest hot show is, and I'm that person in my office, and then I go and get everyone to watch it the next morning. You guys have to check out that episode tonight, and I drive more people to it, and I have a dedicated blog page site for it that gets a lot of traffic, and a lot of news websites pick it up. Then me watching the episode is different to you watching it.
Right.
So we're moving beyond this paradigm of how many views were there. And I just want to make it clear, we're not out to replace all the panel measurement companies out there. Absolutely not. Because we understand those have taken decades to entrench themselves in each of these markets around the world. And a lot of you guys will have your advertising dollars that is driven by your ratings. And so you live and die by your ratings. And we absolutely understand that. And we have a lot of our clients that do. What this does is doesn't replace it. It complements it. It gives you another angle. It gives you a way to benchmark your linear show versus an SVOD original, to understand how well your linear show is doing relative to an SVOD original, which you keep hearing about. You keep getting told it's really popular, but actually could not be that popular in your market. And so it actually reinforces, it strengthens your existing panel measurement data that you capture. So I think that's really, really important point as well, is that, even though we tout and we talk about the amounts of the data and the fact that it's empirical, and it far outweighs and outmeasures everything out there, it is also important, I think, that we work with the industry, with the existing paradigm, rather than trying to, inverse it and shift it overhead. Now, do I think over time the paradigm will shift? Absolutely. But right now, as I said, we have clients, and as you know, we have clients who live and die by how well their new show is doing on linear TV, on primetime, in their market. And if it does really well, then everyone's really happy. And so they use this as a way to complement that, to support that, to see how the demand is building up, even ahead of release, because we can measure demand, as you saw, for content even before the show actually airs, so they can fine-tune their marketing accordingly and so on. Back to the question, which is how do you weight it? Well, because there's so much noise out there, we thought it's really important that we actually sort out between someone just writing a comment between someone actually watching 3 back-to-back episodes. And so that weighting system allows us to do that.
Great. So it sounds like this is a really new and flexible currency that could go, it's agnostic by country, by platform, but is it just English language shows, or because I think I see some people from Brazil, from Italy. Can you just look one country by one country, local programming, and figure it out?
Absolutely, and those are a couple of examples that I showed where, and as you know, we're now starting to have local clients who are like, look, I divide up my budget, half of it, or 80% of it goes to local content, 20% of it only I spend on licensing and English content, and so to them that's absolutely vital. And again, I think what we are seeing is with the internet, the world is increasingly global now. And, we'll see like some telenovelas that get really popular in the Middle East, or some Turkish dramas that find really high demand in Latin America. So some content travels, and sometimes it breaks, what you might have perceived or thought was going to happen for a given show, but for whatever reason, that certain show is really popular in that market. And it's really important that it is a global system. It is language agnostic. It does apply and work for, your local content as well as, one of the Hollywood studios titles as well, and the ability to be able to compare them and benchmark them.
Well, that's. I have one more question, then I'll open it up. We're talking about Donald Trump. A lot of us are obsessed about that, so maybe there's a moment for humor. But also, what I try to do, knowing Warren as well as I do, the guy's a brilliant guy. I always try to stump Warren. So here's how I think I can stump you. I am sure the panel-based systems cannot do this. I'm asking if you can. Can you tell me what the Celebrity Apprentice is doing around the world now, based on all this demand or lack thereof that may be out there for Donald Trump?
Yes.
Can you go on the portal and show me?
All right. So we're going to end this show, and we're going to switch to a demo dashboard of. Is that coming up? Yeah. So you're literally seeing my screen now, and
so this is your live product.
This is our live demand portal. What I showed some pictures from. Let me log in, and what this shows basically is it's a portal where you can go in, and as I said, you can drop down from a menu, pick a market anywhere around the world, and see how any show is doing there. So this is immediately detecting that I'm logging in from the U.S. So it's giving me the top 5 most in-demand shows in the U.S. today. Shameless USA is picked up to number 5, and then we can. Slide over and see number 6 to number 10. Planet Earth is just behind The Crown at number 10, the most in-demand title in the US today. Now you can look at trends over time, how things move. So what I want to do also is, let's go to markets, and I'm looking at the US now, and I'm going to search in real time for The Apprentice. And this is the demand for The Apprentice in the US over the last week. Now, just as for those of you buy stocks and look at financial markets, you have this little slider where you can see how the stock price changes for share price. We do the same thing for TV shows, basically see how the popularity changes over time. So I'm sliding back down until, let's just say from May, right? And I'm seeing the demand for the TV show, The Apprentice, in the US from May till now, right?
So that's fast. So it looks to me like that big spike is when he won the nomination?
There's a big spike in July 8th, and if I zoom in on the last, say, 2 months, this is what we see.
So that's debate number 1, is that first big spike?
Correct. Well, here, I think. The September 11th actually gets a spike, interestingly.
And then that's the election. That's the day of the election. Look how it spikes. And
the highest spike is here, yeah.
So your demand has, for The Apprentice, gone up almost exponentially.
In the US.
And that's incredible.
Correct. And then what's really interesting here is actually we can zoom in on the show. So we can say, your original question was, can you show me how well it's doing around the world? And the answer is absolutely. So we're looking at the Apprentice here, and this is today's data. So it has the highest demand today in Hong Kong and the lowest demand in Brazil. And you can actually see the global heat map for it, right, around the world. So the top 10 markets for it are Hong Kong, Ireland, Thailand, UAE, the UK, China, Russia, Australia, Pakistan, and Malaysia are the top 10 markets for The Apprentice today.
Well, what's fascinating is here's a small lesson that we should just go over a few blocks and pitch him on this, but you can't tell that.
Well, he'll say, told you I should have won the Emmy.
You can't tell this stuff with panels. You can't create business opportunities with panels. But what this is saying to you is, regardless of what you may be hearing about Donald Trump and whether people are going to boycott his hotels or whatever, there's a huge amount of demand. So coming out of this room, you probably pick up The Apprentice pretty cheap, and you know going into it, there's a lot of people who are expressing their demand right now who you can convert. And there's no other way to factor that or find that or prove that other than what you're doing right now.
Absolutely, and what I just have done there while you were talking is I'm comparing two markets here, the US and the UAE. And the UAE, if you can see it, is the top line, the red line at the top, and you can see it actually starts picking up demand exponentially higher than the US. And so, whereas previously it was relatively similar, this is adjusted by population, so you're seeing a demand for this TV show in a local market, international market, and for whatever reason, they're really picking up the TV show. So, yeah, absolutely.
It's amazing. So I think we have time for one or two questions. So I saw a hand come up right here first. There's some mics coming up.
To me, the most important dynamic of this is how do you do your audience sampling? How do you do that? From a broadcast model or from the web and so on and so forth? How do you do that country by country?
Yeah, so good question. And again, because this is a new paradigm, we'll explain this quite a lot, but we don't sample. We pick up everyone. So when we look at the UAE and we want to see what the demand is for The Apprentice and the UAE, we don't say, well, let's try to sample the population and pick up 5,000 people or 3,000 people and see between those how popular and try to sample them really well. This is what we're trying to say. Actually, we're not want to replace that model. We're going to complement it with another more scientific model where we're saying, let's try to capture as many people of the population as possible. Now, we're not going to capture every single person in the UAE, but how do people in the UAE express their demand for The Apprentice right now? Now, I don't know whether The Apprentice airs in the UAE or not. And frankly, it doesn't really matter for the system because the system says, how do people in the UAE express their demand for The Apprentice? Well, they hear about Donald Trump. Okay, cool. So, they'll watch some clips on YouTube or something. So let's just capture that traffic. They might go and search for it on Wikipedia. So let's capture Wikipedia traffic from the UAE. They might go on Facebook or social media and talk about it. So we're going to capture everything, everyone from the UAE who is going on these platforms and doing it, right?
But you're only capturing from the internet. You're not capturing broadcast.
Correct. And so this is what really critical is what we don't feed into it is linear ratings because those already exist. And again, because we're not trying to replace those, we're not trying to say this is a new linear measurement system. They already exist, and every market has its own established rating system, and we're not trying to replace that. And so that's why we don't feed in linear ratings into it, because they do exist, and they're panel-based, and that's a really critical.
And you already have it, so there's no reason to duplicate what they're doing. You can always perhaps should use that data. But I think another example of it, I'm just talking about me, a middle-aged guy, and how you pick me up. And I get a little paranoid now that I'm working with you because I realize you're picking up what I'm doing on the web. So the panels that you see are allegedly talking or hearing from 10, 15,000 households what they're watching. But this is what Warad's done to me or any of you. I'm talking about Stranger Things. Now, I heard about Stranger Things. I just heard about it virally. I don't know, on Facebook, everyone's talking about the show. Sounds cool. I think I may have liked it. I like that idea, you pick that up. Then I watched it, I really liked it. After that, I looked up Winona Ryder, what she'd been doing. Then I looked up the story about when she got arrested for stealing all this stuff out of Neiman Marcus and Hollywood. So all this stuff is being picked up, and yet, and hundreds of millions of people around the world, billions, 1.25 billion little interactions on the web are happening. He picks up all of that. So I don't know, what's better, a panel or this? They're maybe both great, but this is a whole new world and offers a whole lot more flexibility. That's why you can look up Donald Trump or any number of things, anything you want on this, with unlike I think what you can do with panels.
It's not necessarily about watching shows. It's everything to do with that show. There's characters in it.
Correct.
So it doesn't necessarily be a viewing.
It's not the number of you, correct.
It might be someone who watched it 30% on YouTube.
Correct. It is.
We've got some measurement to how that translates.
Yeah, good question. A lot of people, all of our clients start by asking that question. And this is why, so it does include viewing because, like, I'll come back to your question, but this will help answer it. If I ask you guys now, what is the largest OTT platform in the world that has the highest number of daily active users? Netflix? Okay. Any of those? Yeah. So Netflix has about 100, let's just say 100 million maybe subscribers, give or take a few million around the world. Popcorn Time has 300 million daily active users.
That's a illegal downloading service.
That's it's unfortunately a great, has a really beautiful UI and UX, and it's not limited by catalog size in every market. It has all the content on it. And what we capture on it is hundreds of millions of people actually watching The Apprentice if they can't find it on their platform if they're in the UAE, or BitTorrent, again, a few hundred million people on that. So there is actual consumption, people consuming content, where you see them watching an entire episode or 3 or 4 episodes. And we combine that with the clip views, with the comments, with the engagement. And what's really important is the weighting system. And the weighting system says, yeah, we're going to weight those people watching it actually because that's a stronger indication of demand than people just like.
Than my like on Facebook.
Than your like on Facebook, which may have not meant that much, but if it's your like on Facebook, and then you read about it, and then you do this, and then you do that, and the author and so on, well, okay, so clearly you have high demand for the show, and so every interaction is weighted differently. Now, to the question, which is how does that then relate to the actual views of the show? Well, it relates quite highly, and what we see is and this is a really, really good point. If you're going to go away with one point, it's this, is we capture the demand for a TV show in a market, right? So let's just use that example on the screen. So we capture the demand for The Apprentice in the UAE. And we see there's really high demand for it. Now, there could be a linear platform, I think that's my laptop shutting down. Now, there could be a linear platform that is carrying The Apprentice that's not actually seeing high views for it. What does that mean? That's not translating well to views. Well, it means they're not monetizing the show quite well. And what we do with is we work with our clients. We have a ton of these case studies where we actually help them understand that there is a lot higher demand for your show in this market than what you're seeing on your platform. It's not being converted well. You're losing it. You're losing it to piracy. You're losing it through other ways. You're not monetizing it very well, right? When you do monetize the show really well, so when we compare the demand for a show that we capture with the actual views of that show on a platform which has high penetration in the market, 90% correlation also.
Well, I learned that when I was at AMC Networks with this, and this really dawned on me. I'd see this chart, and I'd look at Fear the Walking Dead or other shows. If they weren't going out day and date, you'd see this huge demand and low ratings, and everyone pirated. And that really led to a policy that I put into place is we have to go simultaneous everywhere in the world because you just lost that entire, and especially for a show like that. So let me, maybe one more or 2 quick questions. Scott, and then I'll take one up here.
Great question. How do you deal with the so-called Anne Hathaway factor? And I think you know what I'm talking about when I ask that. You don't know. There was a huge thing a couple years ago where the guys who were doing this for financial purposes found a huge spike in Berkshire Hathaway shares every time Anne Hathaway got nominated for an award, et cetera. So when someone writes an article about something called Stranger Things that's not Stranger Things, et cetera, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, Stranger Things, yeah. Good question. We started the company about 4 years ago, and we only launched this live product earlier this year. And the response we've been seeing in the industry has been phenomenal. And we work with companies all over the world now. And the reason why it took us 3 years before we launched this is that we had to solve all those little things on the background on the platform side. So, I think I still recall the first example that we ran into was, and we keep running into them. First one was a TV show called Misfits, which we're working with someone in Germany, and turns out that there is a band, like a music band called Misfits, which was touring around the same time that we were talking to this broadcaster in Germany. And they were like, how do you know it's for the TV show, not the band Misfits? And so that was the first real life example that we had to work with. And there are many things. We work with BBC Worldwide, and they had a new show, Class, come out, and like the word class, right? I mean, that's used in so many different ways. So what we had to do basically is build into the platform verification criteria, which basically picks up known identifiers of a show. So, for example, where is someone using the word class? Like, what context is it in? Is it happening on the actual official, like let's just take Facebook as a platform, is it happening on the official Facebook page? That's more likely than not attributed to it. If it's not if it's just happening through like a group conversation or a group message, then does it use a hashtag or the handle of that we've already matched with the show? If someone is torrenting the TV show, what is the actual metadata of the file? Does that map to the exact same TV show? So is it Class Season 1, I don't know if anyone's used BitTorrent, like Season 1, Episode 3, I haven't, but so we basically had to build these identifiers that match to the exact pre-known metadata identifiers for a show, whether it's a handle or a hashtag or an episode name. Every episode has an actual name, and a lot of TV shows, they have certain hashtags dedicated to individual episodes that conversations happen around. So it has to be verified. And what the system does, we always try to err on the safe side. Where the system isn't sure, it will flag it, and it always needs to be reviewed by a human being. We run into a ton of, this is one of the first and relatively easier challenges. So one of the more challenging things was more like I was in China a couple of months ago, and back towards the season finale of Game of Thrones when that was airing in the US. And I know a lot of Chinese people, some of my friends' families were going and torrenting the TV show, but they weren't torrenting, they weren't typing like Game of Thrones and Latin characters. They were typing the Chinese characters for Game of Thrones. And so that's one of the things. The other things that we had to solve is actually, okay, well, that needs to also be mapped to it. And so we had to build a natural language processing, an NLP translation system that says, okay, we know these characters map to that TV show, Game of Thrones. And so that traffic is then attributed to that TV show and in China.
So you're saying the algorithm, the artificial intelligence, gets to a point where it can distinguish between a thing that may otherwise, offset or distort what the result can be, which is interesting. Although I'd say, Scott, if it's Berkshire Hathaway is at its all-time high at 230,000. So I want to know who your broker is. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just on that, the last thing I'll say here is, it's not the scary artificial intelligence thing, this being that's about to be sentient and take over the world. It's a combination of different tools that we've put together to solve all these problems that otherwise you would have to solve on your own. Either commission a company to solve that translation problem for you, and you commission a company to solve the metadata problem for you, and you commission a company to solve so we just build these different tools in a platform, and then we said, okay, let's solve these things, and let's just make it really simple where you can drag a thing and see how popular a show is in a market, having solved all those problems.
Well, that's great. Unfortunately, I think
one quick question that we promised.
we're running on time, or do we have time for one question? One question right here. We had a question. Yeah.
I'll just do it from my voice. Very quickly, it's net.
Hang on 1 second.
Oh, okay, thank you. All right, today's November 21st. Let's say I'm a client, and this is very interesting. Thank you, very interesting. And I want to go look at how Quantico did. How far is the data? Like it's the 21st. What is it available to at present? Do I get it like through the first 3 weeks of November? Is it immediate? Is it a week behind? How does that work?
It's updates on a daily basis.
So it's daily. So in other words, I can go in today and get data from yesterday.
Correct.
Now, and quickly, and I apologize.
Or 18 months ago. Right?
Again, if I'm
Or go back and see how well it did, like just drag the selector and then go back and see how the Apprentice did for the last 2 years.
how far back do you go with the data?
2 years.
3 years.
2 years, yeah.
Oh, 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
2 years. So for example, if let's say I'm ABC.
Yes.
I'm here in the States.
Yes.
And I have Quantico, which you
Yes.
mentioned is very popular somewhere.
Yes.
Here, it's not popular. There are really the ratings are not good at all. But I want to.
Or it has high demand, but it's not rating well.
Right.
Different
So I
points.
want to go see how Quantico is doing across everywhere else. How would you, in your words, like in various steps, what am I going to find out about Quantico that I'm not seeing here outside of the traditional ratings?
Sure.
How would you quantify that?
Look, I'll give you a real life example. We looked at Mr. Robot, and we published this as a case study. I know we're running out of time, so I'll try to answer it quickly. Mr. Robot, you mentioned Quantico is not popular here because it didn't rate well. Well, it could be popular, it's just not rating well. So we looked at the actual demand for Mr. Robot season on season, and it goes up. It builds audiences. It builds popularity season on season, Mr. Robot. You look at its ratings, and it drops season on season. Now, so traditionally you would have said, well, its popularity is declining because its ratings, and this is where it comes back to, it actually complements existing measurement systems. Because the ratings for Mr. Robot dropped season 1 to season 2. Its demand actually increased season 1 to season 2.
Demand meaning that people are going, what demand? What do you mean?
Well, everything that we explained. These people are streaming it, they're watching it, they're discussing it, they're critiquing it, they're talking about it, they're sharing it, they're promoting it. All of that combined and weighted, which is really important.
And that's available on all different benchmarks. Like I could look at the sharing, I can look at the promoting, there's different, I can look at the
Correct,
various
and you can
things.
look at it on a market-by-market basis.
Great. Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you
want
very
to
much.
thank everyone. Thank you, Ward.